everyone, and welcome to another episode of Hometown History. I am Jamie.
And I'm Donnie.
And we are here today to talk about the Battle of Hanover. Our official title is the Confederate Occupation of Hanover. For everyone that is online, thank you for joining us. We do have a lovely live audience as well, so we're going to ask for questions to pause until the very end.
Yep, so we're going to get started with where we're at. We are at the York County History Center, and today is Civil War Days. So we are just one part of a larger presentation and thing of events that's going to happen today. And of course, if you watch us, you know that we always have an agenda. So we're going to go over the Battle of Hanover today, before, during, and after. And then we're going to talk about a man named Old Uncle Sam, and then a guy named Abe Lincoln.
We expect today's presentation to last about 40 to 45 minutes, and then we're hoping we can have some discussion at the end. We have also done this already twice before.
Yes.
So I encourage you to go check out our YouTube channel. We started it back in season 2. We are on season 5 now.
Yeah.
Our first one was down in Hanover, and then we refilmed it last year at Seminary Ridge.
Mm-hmm.
So we're really excited to be able to talk about this for the third year about the Battle of Hanover.
Yeah.
So we've got 3 kind of takeaways. Like, what's our thesis? What do we want you to walk away with at the end of today's presentation? The first is that this was a first. This was the first time that there was a Civil War cavalry battle on free soil. This is also the bloodiest event in York County history. Second is that Hanover is a town of defenders. The town was at its best unprepared. Civilians tended to mass casualties that you'll learn about today at the hospitals. The Hanover people were part of a story where there was an outnumbered Union force that kept the Confederates from invading. The last one, number 3, is this battle did have an impact on the overall Civil War. It destroyed or prevented Lee from having the eyes and ears from his most trusted cavalry units during the first day and a half at Gettysburg. Now, he did have other cavalry units available as scouts, but none were as important as Stuart.
So we want to touch on the Heart of Hanover Trail. So if you've ever been to Hanover, and if you haven't, I encourage you to, they have a great walking tour. So they have these storyboards that you can walk through town and you can follow things that happened during the Civil War, like the Civil War trails. They also have the digital storyboards on Witnessing York, which is run by our very own Jamie and Jim McClure. So go to Witnessing York, you can see all of our old episodes and topics, and you can also see these digital storyboards.
A little tiny about us before we get started. Yes. My name is Jamie Norpel. I used to be a high school history teacher. Now I work downtown at a nonprofit that works on public safety efforts. Dami and I have been doing this now for 4 years, which is awesome, and we're neighbors. Wife, I have a 2-year-old, and in my free time, we just do history stuff, whether it's Witnessing York or I have a blog. But frankly, hometown history is occupying some time. So this is where we spend the majority of our time with our monthly podcasts.
Right, and I'm Dami Miller. I am a 3rd Circuit Court of Appeals librarian in Harrisburg. In my free time, I founded the Preserving the History of Newberrytown Facebook group, and I'm a reenactor with the 87th PA.
This girl donates time to that online watering hole to help spread information and news. So we joke that she's the mayor of Newberrytown.
If we didn't have a board of supervisors, I would be the mayor.
So our YouTube channel is called Hometown History, Jamie and Dami's Yoko Backstory, and we have some papers in front of you. We encourage you to take it, and check us out. We don't get paid for this. We just really love history, and we found that young people weren't reading articles as much, but they are watching videos. So if we can catch them, like right now online with Facebook streaming, just trying to be educators and get a passion for history in our community.
And this past weekend, we just hit a milestone. We have over 1,000 hours of people watching our content on YouTube. Yeah, so
I feel like we should confetti. Like,
yeah, so that's YouTube sent me a notification that was an achievement, a milestone on their platform.
At what time do we get paid?
I know. probably 1 million hours.
Right? All right, so let's dive into why you're all here, and that is the Battle of Hanover. So let's talk about that Hanover at this time. Here's a beautiful picture in the late 1800s. Hanover Common had reached its industrial peak in the late 19th century and into the 20th. Between the railroad and the Hanover Depot that opened in 1852, there was a lot of industry. Some of the businesses included a dye maker, a feed mill, distilling company, of course, very important, lumber and coal yards, a foundry, a water wheel manufacturer, cattle yard, of course, is important, hemp factory, which would have been, as you guys know, used for rope, a firehouse, and a market house. So Hanover has a long-standing history as a very hands-on and self-reliant spirit.
The Civil War would have been the build-up to Hanover's industrial might. So the Battle of Hanover was a significant Civil War battle with 343 casualties, meaning dead, wounded, or missing. And it represents the worst carnage ever sustained here in York County. So to set the scene for you, on June 30th, 1863, Confederate General Jeb Stuart's cavalry consisted of 4,500 men, and that outnumbered the Union General Kilpatrick's cavalry of only 3,900 men.
And sorry, I need to change the slide, it's 3,900. Okay, that is the correct, so we need to update that. So the Confederates charged along Frederick Street through the farm fields that belonged to a man named Carl Forney. They were chasing the fleeing Union rear guard who were waiting actually in a breakfast line. So talk about not being very prepared,
right,
and knowing what to expect. And that breakfast line was staffed by townspeople. I think that's one thing that we forget when we had soldiers sprinkled around the country. It wasn't like we necessarily had like Red Cross depots where people were imported in. It was local townspeople that said, let's make sure that these Union people are fed. So they were, when the clashing happened, it was when the Confederates reached the 18th Pennsylvania Cavalry Regiment.
And the Confederates plunged into the column of Union soldiers, and soon the Union cavalry backed up, withdrawing north to the railroad tracks on present-day Broadway. There, the Union counterattacked. So we want you to sort of look at the map and picture the men of New York and Pennsylvania fighting face-to-face against men from North Carolina and Virginia. So I can tell you, as a reenactor, we try and be as authentic as possible, but there's no Civil War battle reenactment that's ever going to give you that authenticity of going into battle and fighting strangers face to face at a close distance. So I can only imagine for these men in York County who had probably never seen battle before, this was probably a terrifying moment.
It makes you wonder about the power of AI.
Yes.
And if you were to take, like, let's say all of the Civil War known correct information and plug it into AI and ask it for it to create you a video, it just makes you wonder.
There are some really great like first-person videos that have been made throughout the years where they give the reenactors like GoPro cameras, and you're sort of seeing it from their point of view. Yeah, and it's very chilling.
Yeah,
I was gonna say the least.
Disturbing a little
Yes.
bit. Let me go back for a second. So there was a historian named John Krebs, and he described what happened, and we thought we would quote him because it was just pretty powerful. He said, "Because of the fluid nature of the battle, unit cohesion was lost as the fighting degenerated into a whirlwind of hand-to-hand melees in the streets, alleys, and surrounding fields." I mean, like, can you imagine that? That was our ancestors, like down in Hanover, that were going hand-to-hand in a field. Like that just blows my mind. Like, you think today of more like drone strikes. You don't really think of that like hand-to-hand combat.
War has become very impersonal.
Yeah, oh gosh, yep. So Union troops, they were returning after nearing Abbottstown, and there was the head of the long column, which tipped the balance in the Union's favor, because as you know, the Unions were at the underdogs here. With the additional reinforcements though, the Union made another charge, which then confused the Confederates even more. So the rebels were driven to the southwest portion of Hanover to higher grounds, and then Hanover Center once again was under Union control.
And that leads us to the Union counterattack, which thankfully was successful. So 20 worn-out Confederates were taken as prisoners, and an unidentified Union private from Vermont had claimed to have captured Confederate Lieutenant Colonel Payne. Another Union private named Abram Folger of New York also claimed to have captured him. So we have two men claiming to have captured the same person, probably at different times, so you'll have to decide who is right. And he said, "We captured one of their colonels. It's in an old tan vat into which his horse had fallen." So you can imagine what that would have been like. and his gray uniform with its velvet facing and white gauntlet gloves, and his face and hair had all been completely stained. So him and his horse, they fall into this tanning vat, and that's how he's captured, allegedly.
By 11 a.m. that morning, Stuart was on the run with his mare, who was named Virginia. He splashed into a tributary of Plum Creek, and he was fleeing with other Confederate soldiers away from about 25 to 30 Union soldiers that were also, though, on horseback. While they pushed against the rushing water, the Union had fired pistols in hot pursuit. The stream was pretty narrow. Here's a picture of kind of current day, what we're talking about. But at the time, it reached still 15 feet wide, which is still pretty broad. You couldn't just step over it. And in some places, as up to 4 feet deep. So if he had fallen in, of course, it would have been very difficult to get out. If they could catch Stuart, it would mean a huge win and a mega morale booster for the Union troops.
Absolutely. So Stuart made it across the stream and onto a farm. And there he regrouped with his men. By that afternoon, he withdrew east of Hanover toward Jefferson and Seven Valleys, eventually making it all the way to York, New Salem, and Dover. And then the people of Hanover weren't rid of all the Confederate soldiers until almost dark.
By the next morning, this was now July 1st, Stuart hadn't been in contact with the commanding Confederate General Robert E. Lee, and he was on the run, full force going into the Union Army over in Gettysburg, which you guys all know. By July 3rd, these two cavalries met again in the fields of Gettysburg, and yet again, we had Union troops that were outnumbered as they took on Stuart.
The good old underdogs.
Yeah, and these pictures, by the way, are taken from a reenactment back in 1963.
The heyday of Civil War reenacting was like the 60s to the 90s.
Interesting. So we start planning for a 2063 reenacting.
Yeah.
Gray.
Hey, you're out there. There's reenactors out there right now in their 80s and 90s.
Yes,
so, yeah,
I love that.
Let me tell you, it's something that once you get into it, you don't want to stop. So if you've ever been to Hanover, you're probably wondering, what's that statue in the square? So that is the picket, and it's a life-size bronze statue. It's a Union cavalryman on his horse on picket duty, hence the name, the picket. And it's on a granite pedestal, and its sculptor was from Boston, and his name was Cyrus Dallin. It was the men like this who prevented Stuart's cavalry from taking a direct path to reconnect with Robert E. Lee's forces. So it was their job to scout and report back the valuable information that they gathered. And this left Lee without his most trusted eyes and ears, wasting precious time to take the long way around. So that's why, just your average soldier on a horse on picket duty has a statue in Hanover.
So you guys, one of the challenges and fun parts of hometown history is that we research different topics every month. And so in a lot of ways, I am more of a generalist, and I know a lot about, a little about a lot in New York County. Dami is our Civil War resident historian. She's the one who knows a lot about that. What is a picket though? Like, what is that?
So when you're on picket duty, you're basically put out on guard duty, or you're made...
Like sentry?
Yes, sort of.
Okay.
So it could be you're standing in one place, or you're mounted on a horse and you're supposed to go back and forth. When we're at the Heritage Center in Gettysburg and we do picket duty, we go up and down the sidewalk. So it looks like we are protecting the Old Wax Museum.
Okay.
Or the hotel across the street. But when you're on picket duty, your main job is to make sure that you don't see any enemies. And if you do, or if you see something suspicious, you take it back to command and you tell them, like, hey, there's a Confederate out there, like, we should probably do something.
Yeah.
Or like, hey, I think they're getting closer to us, I see something. Really, you're the eyes and the ears, and you are protecting your camp, and you're scouting for things that are coming.
I'm gonna start using this for my 2-year-old, because yesterday he decided he wasn't gonna nap for the first time ever, and he's also started climbing out of his crib. So I've gotten to the point where I will literally hold his door shut and silently, so he goes back to sleep in his bed, and I'm just
barricade him in,
literally holding it. Go to bed, buddy. I feel like I'm on picket duty.
There you go.
Go to bed.
You're halfway to Civil War reenacting.
Were there any other fun words that you learned through your reenacting experience?
I mean, honestly, I've watched war movies before I reenacted, but just some of the vernacular, trying to figure out the different ranks and how people were promoted, I learned a lot through it. I mean, it's been 9 years now, so to go back and pick out like one specific thing is kind of difficult. It was definitely a crash course when I joined, but I'm glad I did. And you know, the Civil War reenacting community is really welcoming, and they want people to reenact, and they want people to join the hobby, so they're really willing to teach you as you go.
Even as a woman?
Yeah, even as a woman, there is still some sexism in reenacting. Some people don't think women should portray soldiers, but, you know, I broke the mold.
Do it anyway, yes.
Yeah. Believe it or not, I can fit all of this hair under a hat. So, you're probably wondering, what did the civilians do when all of this was happening? Because you have to remember, this wasn't on a battlefield that was set up ahead of time, where it's like, hey, we're meeting at this empty field. You know, no, this was Hanover. It was populated by civilians. So, as we said earlier, the Battle of Hanover was the bloodiest single event to take place on York County soil. So, think about that. You know, there's no designated spots for fighting, like Jamie said. They didn't call ahead and say, hey, I'll meet you in the cornfield. They marched into town and effectively,
wherever they met.
Yeah, it was just, okay, we've met and now we either surrender or we have a fight or someone runs away. So I can only imagine what it felt like for those civilians, because you think about the war happening in Ukraine or Israel and Gaza, and that is a prime example of the enemy just showing up to your front door. And how do you react? What do you do when that happens?
Do you feel your adrenaline rush when you're reenacting?
Sometimes. I mean, obviously you know that you are out there to honor our ancestors, to make it as authentic as possible. But there's just something, especially at the Battle of Gettysburg, when all of the cannons are going off behind you, and you can barely see in front of you because of the smoke from the rifles. It's, yeah, you do sort of get an adrenaline rush.
Yeah, it's still exciting. You're kind of immersed in the sensory experience.
You are, yes.
Yeah,
absolutely.
So let's talk more about what the townspeople did on that terrifying day in 1863. They made makeshift hospitals to care for the wounded. Jim McClure has said this is hospitality before hostility. When General Kilpatrick arrived in Hanover, he halted outside the community leader Jacob Wirt's house on Frederick Street, and that is where the theater is now.
And then at 8 a.m., Kilpatrick went inside Wirt's home to review information and analyze maps of the area. Wirt welcomed him in, and this speaks of the seriousness of the day. Citizens knew that this was life or death, so they opened their homes to support the Union in the North. Union General George Custer ended up sleeping in the Wirt house on the night of June 30th, and Kilpatrick slept in Central Hotel, which is still standing on the northwest corner of the square. So you can actually go to Hanover and you can visit these places. They're still standing today.
And don't forget about that walking trail. They now have signs out that describe it.
Yeah, so you don't even have to guess where you are. It tells you exactly where to go.
The citizens of Hanover also fed the famished troops. There was Reverend William Saber. He was the pastor of Emmanuel Reformed Church, and he encouraged all the townspeople to take their food and go out and feed them. So they did. They assembled themselves and they fed the hungry cavalry. They brought them things like breads and pretzels, pies, cakes, coffee, and even beer.
But they liked that
pretty
one.
Generous. There was one dashing young lieutenant that even bent down on one knee and kissed a woman's hand. Her name was Sally Weinbrenner, and he thanked her for the cake that she gave him.
Bet she swooned.
I would have, yes.
So I'm going to read you a quote from Joanna Thomas. The morning of the battle, I went to the square with a wash basket of bread and a kettle of apple butter and helped feed the soldiers that were coming into Hanover. The soldiers were awful tired and hungry, and we were glad to get the food people were giving them. The square was full of townspeople with baskets of food, and then word came that General Stuart and his cavalry were coming.
So she continues. She says, General Kilpatrick told us there was going to be fighting and we should get off the street. I started to run home, but before I could get across the street, some of the rebel cavalry came along. The officer halted his men for a moment so we could get by. I ran and kept running until I got home. Just as I started through the door of my house, a bullet hit a rain spout, glanced off, and grazed my dress. This shows you how close the civilians were to this.
People think of Jenny Wade being the female civilian casualty at Gettysburg. That could have been this poor woman in Hanover. So while the Union soldiers nourished themselves for the upcoming battle, the Confederates didn't waste any time. An artillery shell burst over the town, and obviously that frightened all of the citizens. That would frighten me. Major John Hammond rode to Center Square, telling them to take shelter in their basements, and Reverend Saber heard Hammond. In a few minutes, there will be fighting on the streets. So they were getting the word out to the citizens. This was the last moment of peace before the storm of gunfire. For many, it was their last meal, their last act of kindness, and some of the men would never enjoy this again. So, you know, unfortunately, being the bloodiest thing to ever happen on York County soil.
Yeah, but I mean, I'm glad that you guys are all here and taking it seriously, because I think it is worth, you know, learning about. So let's transition then to the 3 days before the Battle of Hanover, when the Confederates were scouting out their attack. We have been talking at you for 20 minutes, so a lot of you are here with a friend or you're close to people. So I'm going to ask that you turn and talk to your neighbor. Can you tell the teacher, like, I'm like trying to talk to your elbow partner. I taught high school history for 10 years and I absolutely loved it, but they were 9th graders. But you guys are going to love discussing just as much. So the question is, if you were trying to defeat an enemy today, what infrastructure would you take out first? What would be your first priority to take your enemy and put them at a disadvantaged position?
And if you're watching us on Facebook Live, please leave a comment in the comment section. We would love to hear from our virtual viewers, but I would obviously think of power lines, bridges, army depots.
Yeah, don't give them all out. Turn and talk to your neighbor. It's about 1 minute, just discussing.
You could be more creative than I am.
Figure out the cyber technology.
Yeah, well, today, yeah, absolutely.
Anything electronic.
Okay, I just heard something, anything electronic, so that's a good one. Does anyone want to yell out an answer? Anyone brave enough?
Yeah, we said roads.
Roads.
Cell towers. We live in Hanover.
Cell towers.
We take out the manufacturing facilities
The
because they're
manufacturing
sources of food.
Okay, so this is coming straight from Hanover residents.
Oh, yeah, the canning factory.
Well, there's canning, there's goods, there's Snyder's, you know, there's
Those
lots of food.
potatoes.
Yeah, lots of food.
Not the Snyders.
Can you guess then, what were the priority of the Confederates? It was telegraph lines. Telegraph lines.
Trains,
Yes.
probably
Yeah.
trains.
They didn't have the cell towers back then, but they had the telegraph lines. So that brings us to June 27th, and Confederate Lieutenant Colonel Elijah White brought his Virginia battalion of 260 men to Pennsylvania, and they were on a mission to destroy our railroad bridges and our telegraph lines, like we just discussed.
So let's talk about Daniel Trone. So he was a telegraph operator for the Hanover Railroad since 1860. His office is at the present day location of the Abraham Lincoln plaque, to put that in perspective. He had worked in his office for about 3 years, and he didn't want to see it destroyed by the enemy. As White's army stormed Hanover, Trone and other employees fled to Baltimore, and he wrote his boss, A.W. Eichelberger, who was the president of the Hanover Branch Railroad.
And this is what he said: I saw about a dozen rebels after Adriel Gitt and another man who I did not recognize coming as hard as they could rid up the alley. The rebels were about 40 yards behind, and they shot at least a dozen times after them while going across the commons. As soon as I saw them coming, I pulled up my instruments and ran up to the garret of the railroad warehouse and hid them under the floor. So he was trying to be proactive. And when Trone returned to town, he telegraphed news about the Battle of Gettysburg to major northern cities. These news agencies relied on Trone to tell the world what was happening during the 3 days battle.
When Trone left Hanover, he took the town's form of communication with him. The Confederates also, like I said, tore down the telegraph lines along their journey, and without the telegraph, as you know, Hanover was very isolated. They had just sustained White's raid, and of course there was this uneasy feeling of the trauma they just experienced, and it only worsens then when you don't get word of what's happening around you. It also meant that Hanover couldn't help the communication needs of our Union forces in Gettysburg as well. They couldn't lend any type of information that could help.
Yeah, and to bring that back to modern day times, we're thinking about the people of Ukraine or the protesters in Iran, where Russia made sure that they took out the power lines, the telephone lines. They didn't have internet access until Starlink was added. In Iran, when they protest, the government just shuts down the internet, so there's no form of communication. So if you take away people's forms of communication, they can't gather and protest because they don't know where to go, they don't know who's in charge.
No organization.
Yeah, no organization. So you're really crippling an entire community when you're taking away communication.
So now, let's get into the aftermath of the Battle of Hanover. By the evening of June 30th, the Battle of Hanover was over, but the town was far from going back to your business as usual. There was a local physician that helped out, many of them actually good Samaritans. They set to work caring for the wounded. So they took them to Center Square at the concert hall, and then later Marion Hall, which is at present-day York Street.
Again, another place that you can go see where things happened. So a few days later, a makeshift hospital opened within the Pleasant Hill Hotel. So you have to remember back then that we didn't have like UPMC or Penn State Harrisburg. If you wanted to set up a hospital, you took over someone's house or business or a church even. So 42 recovering soldiers were immediately admitted to this hospital. And after the Battle of Gettysburg, the US government ended up renting the building as an official Army hospital where about 150 men received long-term treatment. Trains carried up to 14,000 wounded men from Hanover to Baltimore, York, Philadelphia, and Harrisburg. So that was a double dose of death from both battles, because you have to remember the Battle of Gettysburg happens right after this. So it's not just the men wounded in Hanover, it's the men wounded in Gettysburg as well.
We love primary documents. Anytime that we can pull in actual primary sources to support what we're saying. So we wanted to quote a doctor that was there. His name is Dr. Perrin Gardner. He was a surgeon in charge of the hospital, and he said, "The hospital is supplied by the sympathetic people and administered to the suffering wounded by devoted women. A heartier response to the cause of humanity never came from more generous people than we have witnessed here."
Don't let anyone ever tell you that women did not contribute to the war effort.
Especially, is it Hanoverian? No, Hanoverian?
Hanoverian.
Hanoverian. Okay, thank you. I was like, that does not sound right. Hanoverian women.
I love it. So while the doctors and the nurses aided to the wounded, others cared for the corpses and the horse carcasses that line the streets. Because again, this is another aspect of battle that people don't think about. It wasn't just men being left to die, it was also their horses. So the hot summer air meant that decay and rot would set in very quickly. So 39 men were killed, and the number was probably over 40, and some died days after the battle from their injuries. So you have to remember, a lot of people weren't dying instantly. They were dying either being left on the battlefield because they couldn't get to them quickly enough, they were dying after surgeries, or they were dying from infections from their injuries. Citizens carried Union bodies to a makeshift morgue in the nearby foundry, which is the current day Trinity United Church of Christ. Again, this wasn't like it is today. You don't get taken to the morgue and you're not put on ice. They had to find a place to put these bodies, so they had to commandeer different places in town. They were placed in the Reformed Cemetery, one of Hanover's oldest graveyards. Union dead were reinterred at the Gettysburg National Cemetery, and the Confederates went south. So a lot of the men during the Civil War that were buried immediately after their death, once they were able to identify them and get a hold of their families, either through letters, telegraph, the newspaper, the families would come, they would have the body dug up, and then they would be taken to their final resting place.
We have a picture to show you then too, coming up here in a moment. So I want you to turn again to your neighbor. You're going to make a guess. How many soldiers from York County served in the Civil War?
This was one of them. This is me. And if you're online, put your answer in the comments. I know there's some history buffs watching us.
All right, let's see if you're right. So you're going to show me either a thumbs up, you thought more, or thumbs up, you thought less. More or less?
I heard some, ooh.
Okay, less, yeah, right? Yeah, I was also surprised. About 510 total, not just in the Battle of Hanover, right, died from war, wounds, and diseases.
And if you know anything about medicine during the Civil War, they didn't understand germ theory, so there were more people dying from infection and illness than actual battle wounds. Yeah. So another asked the audience, dun dun dun, anyone know how many soldiers died during the entire war? So talk amongst yourselves. And again, if you're watching us online, give us your Civil War expertise in the comments.
Killed.
Yeah.
Casual, killed or casual? Killed.
No, they died.
Died. So died from either illness, wounds, direct hit on the battlefield.
It's a range.
Wasn't it around 750,000?
Wow, very good. Yeah.
Good job.
Yep.
How do I say that?
Hanoverian.
Our Hanoverian in the back corner is schooling all of you
I
today.
wish that next time we do this presentation, I'm going to include a graph, because whenever I would teach my students, I did American history, Civil War to current day, I would show them graphs of the amount of American deaths in each war, and we weren't even close to this in World War I and World War II, and they never understood, why is it so high in the Civil War? Well, why is it so high?
We were fighting ourselves.
Yes, right? The enemy is ourselves, so every person dead was an American, casualty. Yeah.
And that's why Civil Wars are affordable.
So Donnie was talking about disinterment. So here is a one-of-a-kind photo. This was taken on February 6th, 1864. This is the only known image of the exhumation process of Gettysburg when they reinterred people. Workers would use long metal hooks to pull out the decomposing bodies when they moved them. So I can't imagine the smells of this process, but it was not a pretty job.
And I just want to interject and say this was June, July, and August. Think about how hot it is today. It's like 70% humidity. It's supposed to be 87 degrees. Would you want to go out in trousers, a long shirt with a metal rod and start digging up dead, decaying bodies?
So the dead were July.
Yeah.
This is in February.
Yeah, they kept.
So it's winter, but think about the length of time of how long. Right. I mean, yeah.
Not fun. Not to have to bury them and then not to have to reinter them.
So remember we shared our agenda in the beginning, and we shared we're going to focus on the Battle of Hanover before, beginning, and after, but we also want to share this man's important stories, his old Uncle Sam.
Old Uncle Sam. So many people assume that because York County is above the Mason-Dixon line that no person was enslaved here. And unfortunately, that's wrong. So Pennsylvania's Gradual Abolition Act of 1780 was the first extensive piece of legislation to outlaw slavery, but it wasn't until the 1840s that people were actually being freed.
So today we learned a lot about the Battle of Hanover, and some, of course, like I shared with you, the fighting took place on Carl Forney's farm. But it was on that farm that the last person who was enslaved toiled in York County. So Hanover is stepping up today with some Civil War
history. Is bringing us a lot of history today.
His name was Old Uncle Sam, and Carl's father, his name was Mark Forney. He freed all his family's enslaved people years earlier. So Old Uncle Sam moved into a small rudimentary cabin in Mudtown. Today it is known as Pennville. He died in 1840, and today the land has been developed into a strip mall.
Why does that not surprise anyone here in the audience?
Yep.
So Hanover stood in the direct path of an untold number of freedom seekers on their way to cross the Susquehanna River into the north. So remember when we talked about Jacob Wirt, the community leader who welcomed General Kilpatrick into his home? Well, he was also a conductor on the Underground Railroad. So good job, Jacob. The Underground Railroad was a secret network of houses, businesses, wagons, boats, and trails that assisted freedom seekers. So guides or people who helped were known as conductors on the Underground Railroad, and Jacob Wirt gave the freedom seekers food, rest, and assistance on their journey.
There was another conductor whose name was Bill Piper. He was a fiddle player and also a grandson of someone who was enslaved. He provided safe passage for African Americans in his small cabin that he had in Westminster Road Commons. Prior to the Civil War, he had grown mysteriously recluse because he couldn't let his friends know what he was doing. The Federal Fugitive Slave Act made it a crime to help freedom seekers. So here we have someone who was willing to sacrifice relationships with his friends and family to help others in need. It's a lot of dedication.
It is. It's very dangerous and very noble of him. So now we're going to talk about a forgotten lynching. So I'm going to set the stage for you. On July 1st, around 4,500 Confederate cavalrymen passed through the region when Major General Jeb Stuart's division rode from Dover toward Carlisle via Dillsburg. Nearly 600 more horses were taken from northwestern York County. So just imagine they come through, they steal your horse, unfortunately. Warrington Township by Pinchot Park was hit particularly hard and was nearly a quarter of the farms and the main roads that had been known to be raided at that time. So residents were obviously angry about the stolen horses and the mules just as the summer harvest neared, because that was your bread and butter. If you were going to live in an agricultural society and you were going to farm and have a harvest, you needed your tools, which were your horses and your mules.
Dami and I just filmed another episode on the Mifflin House, and we broke it up into 3 different segments. The last segment, part 3, is on Wrightsville's role in the Civil War, and we have 10-15 minutes for that segment. But we talk about the Confederates. They actually raided the Mifflin House. They didn't take horses. You want to guess what they took?
Food.
Milk and cream. Yeah, milk and cream from the Mifflin House. So let's talk about then this victim of lynching. At least one rebel raiding party, likely Jenkins' party, which was from June 27th to 29th, was accompanied by a black man. He was either enslaved or he was a servant, we're not quite sure, but he accompanied the troops on the expedition in Pennsylvania. He became very widely known in a short period of time as being a horse thief. He had been seen hanging around the area even after being warned to leave.
So who was a part of this lynch mob? There were 8 different members of the Spar family that lost horses to the Confederates over a 5-day period. So the family likely was brimming with hostility and angst over this thievery. And that brings us to Jeremiah Miley Spar, who was a soldier for Company H of the 87th Pennsylvania. And he had just walked back to his home in Warrington Township following the Union defeat at the Second Battle of Winchester 3 weeks earlier. And that gentleman just so happens to be my 3rd great-grandfather.
How do you feel?
You know, I'm not very proud of the fact that my 3rd great-grandfather was part of a lynch mob. It's not something to be celebrated.
I don't mean to laugh, it was just your face.
No,
I'm sorry.
Yeah, I mean, I reenact with the 87th Pennsylvania, so that is one of the ancestors, you know, that I think about when I'm reenacting, and I'm trying to put myself in the Civil War era and the mindset of you just stole my livelihood.
Yeah.
I just went through hell in a battle and literally walked for, you know, 3 weeks from a battle where most of my friends and comrades were killed, and I come home and I discover this. I'd like to think I would not retaliate by lynching someone. Again, we can't really put the ideals of the time period to now, but it definitely makes for an interesting family history story.
Yeah.
You know.
And as her mom's laughing in the front row. Kudos to you though. I think generations ago, probably this would have been just swept under the rug. Like, we don't talk about, you know, the bad things that our family has done. Us millennials get bad rap sometimes, but at least in this case, like, we're owning it. Well, Dami's owning it. Well, I'm not have anything to do with it.
You know, I think about the people of Australia. We know Australia was a prison community. So in Australia, it's sort of a badge of honor. You look back through your family history, and it's the person that has the ancestor that committed the worst crime. You sort of get, like, kudos for that. Like, why did your ancestor get banned to Australia? Obviously here it's different.
I had no idea. That's so interesting.
In Australia, they'd probably be like, okay, Dom, that's a good story.
Yeah, right,
Here,
yeah.
they're just like, yeah, that's not something to be proud
What a
of.
strange flex.
It is.
So there were some other people in attendance as well in the lynch mob. We have Spar's brothers, Lewis and Henry, Spar's neighbor and local merchant by a man named William R. Smith, whose country store, his general store, had just been cleaned out by the rebels back in June 29. Again, we're sensing this no excuse, right? Lynching, bad, 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 but also we're understanding a little bit more of the heightened emotional sense of the time period. And there was also Levi River. He was a cabinet maker and farmer, and Louis Reeser, right, accounting, right? So there's a lot of people here, neither of whom filed post-war claims for losses that were incurred by the rebels.
So that leads us to the lynching. So the group found the black man in the area of Big Conawago and Bermudian Creeks in southern Warrenton Township. And after some verbal sparring, Jeremiah Spar murdered the horse thief with at least 3 shots from his military-issued Springfield rifle.
We thought we would share Scott Mingus's reflection on this, and he is presenting with Jim McClure later today. He wrote, "Race may have played a role, but as Dennis Brand points out, an errant rebel thief, white or black, was likely to have been killed by this angry mob." Yep, so, and here's what's also kind of messed up with the lynching too, is they hid the body under some brush alongside the road. So that's pretty messed up.
So you're probably wondering, they killed this man, they hid the body, so what happened? And why do we know about it? So after the victim's body was discovered and the coroner's inquest took place, 2 prominent Wellsville men, Johnny Wells and David Coldwalder, pushed for the 6 men to be arrested. And it took several weeks for a grand jury to be convened in New York under Judge Robert Fisher, but lacking sufficient evidence, the charges were dismissed. It's not like today where we have door cameras, Ring doorbell cameras. We didn't have, people filming with their cell phones. So you could get away, unfortunately, with a lot more in this time period.
Here's a fun fact. So I work in public safety for a living. You want to turn to your neighbor and guess what percentage of homicides countrywide are solved? What percentage of homicides are actually solved countrywide?
Well, our residents from Hanover get this one right as well.
I know. The correct answer is 50%. 50.
Wow.
So are you a glass half full or glass half empty, right? Because 50% are solved, means 50% are not solved. Here in York County, I'm happy to report that we have an excellent police force and detectives to investigate. Our clearance rate is 80% of homicides are cleared here.
Thank goodness. So if there's any lessons to be learned from this, it's that this was York's only lynching on record, and nothing good came of it, and it's a terrible case, and it happens when people take justice into their own hands. So we are not advocating for vigilante justice, especially in 2025. Please let the professionals handle things.
Finally, the very end part of our presentation today, did Abraham Lincoln really come to Hanover?
My favorite guy. I love him so much.
Yes, definitely, absolutely. Abraham Lincoln was in Hanover. Less than 5 months after the Battle of Hanover, Abraham Lincoln's train briefly stopped in Hanover. It was November 18th. His train trudged down the main line around 5 p.m. What happened was there was a freight train that was trying to get through, so his train moved over so they could pass onto an auxiliary line to make room. And when the train began to move again, Lincoln ducked his 6'4" frame through the coach's car doorway and said this:
"I trust when the enemy was here, the citizens of Hanover were loyal to our country and the stars and stripes. If you are not all true patriots in support of the Union, you should be." That's my Abraham Lincoln
I was gonna
voice.
say, we need to work on your depth, your baritone.
He wasn't feeling well when this happened, and he was later diagnosed with smallpox, believe it or not. And his train then left for Gettysburg, where he delivered his immortal Gettysburg Address.
So our final turn and talk is I'm about to go over a takeaway. We want you to have learned something today. Could you share with your neighbor what's one thing that you learned today? Maybe about a minute.
And if you're online, put it in the comments because we love to hear from our online viewers. I learned that I need to practice my Abraham Lincoln impression. What I think it actually is. There you go.
I need to start annoying my family by incorporating old historical words into as many sentences as possible.
When I was on ticket duty outside Otto's Creek.
I feel like you with your Jane Eyre and Jane Austen probably in your reenacting, because you don't just do Civil War, you do other stuff. Could probably do it.
I do all the time periods.
But not as a narrator.
No.
All right, so at a minimum, we're hoping that you walk away with these takeaways. One is that this was it was a Civil War first cavalry battle that happened on free soil. It was also the bloodiest event in York County history. Be proud of Hanover. They were defenders. This was a town of people who were unprepared, and their civilians stepped up to care for the mass casualties. The Hanover people are part of a story where we have outnumbered Union forces that kept the Confederates from invading. Cannot say the same thing about the rest of the county. And finally, number 3, the impact. This had an impact on the overall Civil War, especially over in Gettysburg, because it kept the eyes and ears away from Lee. Lee he had other cavalry units available to him as swords of scouts, but he really counted on Stuart, and this set him as back.
Yeah. And if you enjoyed today's talk and you want to see us again, on August 21st, we're going to have the TAP Talks on the history of water and its connection to brewing beer. And you can also stay here on the 3rd floor of the York County History Center to hear Jim McClure and Scott Mingus. They go on at 12:30. Oh, are they at the Colonial Complex? Okay, I apologize. They are not here on the 3rd floor. I think there are going to be other presentations up here. I know there's programs down in the lobby, but if you go over to the Colonial Complex at 12:30, you can see Scott Mingus and Jim McClure. That's one that you're not going to want to miss. And their talk's going to be about the Civil War as well.
So thank you all for your time today.
Yeah, thank you.